He didn't ask for a discount, didn't seek special treatment, only asked if he could touch the M14 rifle hung behind the glass case, the one he'd carried on his back during the withdrawal from Khe Sanh that year. But the store clerk mocked him, called him Grandpa, ridiculed his limping gait, then told him to leave. He didn't get angry. He just nodded and turned away, as he'd done his whole life. What they didn't know was the name on the dog tag he wore still held weight, and exactly 1 hour later, an entire SEAL team walked through the door, not a word spoken. So, who were they? And that old man, who was he really? All right, my dear audience, get ready for a story that'll leave you speechless. Take a second to like the video and subscribe, but only if you truly connect with what I'm sharing here. And drop a comment below to let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always exciting to see someone joining us from all corners of the world. The small gun shop, tucked between an old Western bar and a one-man gas station, had once been a regular stop for veterans each fading afternoon. Now, it mostly drew young men seeking switchblades, camouflage jackets, or tactical backpacks, not for any mission, but to feel like they'd been part of something grand, a feeling they'd never truly known. At 10:17 a.m., the door chime rang, so faint it barely registered, but the man who stepped in brought a silence that made the air inside pause for a single breath. He was about 70. His back wasn't hunched, but something heavy behind his neck kept his head slightly bowed. Dark leather boots, creased to the shape of old steps, khaki pants, worn at the knees. A backward cap with a faded Ranger logo hugged his brow, bleached by years, but holding its form. He walked slowly, not from fatigue. Each step was deliberate, as if the ground beneath was no longer trustworthy. His left leg tilted slightly. A small, weathered photo was pinched between bony fingers, its edges crumpled, one corner torn, but held in both hands like a treasure. Without speaking, without glancing around, he went straight to the counter. Behind it, a young clerk, about 20, high and tight haircut, a Bluetooth earbud in one ear, his hand scrolling a phone, TikTok videos flickering non-stop. The other hand was stuffed deep in his jacket pocket. His jaw worked gum, popping rhythmically, out of sync with the soft country tune drifting from the ceiling speaker. The man placed the photo on the counter, not forcefully, just placed it. "Kid, you still got that original M14 hanging behind the glass?" His voice was low, steady, dry as gravel scraped by a boot heel. The clerk didn't look up right away. He was mid-clip, titled American Soldiers' Hilarious Gun Training. When the question sank into the silence, he glanced up, his eyes flicking from the photo to the old man. Then he chuckled softly. The laugh held no clear malice, but it coated the air with indifference. "Yeah, we got it, but I don't think you'd want to haul that thing, sir." He smirked. "It's heavy as hell." The man didn't flare up, didn't counter with shame or proof. He just nodded, his eyes never leaving the glass display case where an original M14 lay silent, behind dust and dim fluorescent light. "I don't want to haul it," he said. "Just want to touch it once. Just touch." His voice didn't waver, but it carried a scratch, not from his throat, from memory. The air in the shop didn't shift, but something moved, faintly, in the pauses of that sentence. A man who hadn't touched a piece of his life in decades, now asking only to brush it with his fingers, like someone tracing their own footprints in sand, knowing the waves would erase them soon. The clerk said nothing more, but his shrug and the sharp pop of his gum answered for him. The man stood there. For one more breath. No one spoke. The photo lay there, hazy, but if you looked closely, it showed 8 men in a dusty field, all smiling with weary grit, eyes resolute. One was him, younger, holding an M14, standing center, staring into the lens as if daring time to capture something that truly mattered. But no one in the shop looked at the photo. No one asked. No one cared. The old man nodded faintly, as if confirming something to himself he'd already known. He said no more. No pleading, no begging, no urging. He just turned, walking out the door as he'd come in, silent, unhurried, one leg tilting slightly, the whole world behind him as if it had never changed. A different voice rose from behind the counter, not loud, but sharp enough to shred any fragile silence left in the air. Trying to relive your glory days? This is a shop, not a museum. The space tightened. A laugh followed, light, brief, not quite bitter, but in those sounds was the careless indifference of youth. The disrespect wasn't born of malice, but of a vast gap between two worlds, one that had burned in gunfire, and one that knew war only through movies and social media memes. The man didn't reply. He didn't lift his head, didn't argue, didn't push back against the laughter. He just lowered his eyes to the photo still lying before him. The photo he'd preserved for decades, carefully pressed between book pages, taped at the edges each time it tore. 8 soldiers in the frame, mud-stained clothes, dust-caked faces, some squinting against the sun, some smiling, a half-smile, but real. They slung arms over each other's shoulders, standing on jagged ground, a row of low trees rustling behind, like memories of a place no one wanted to recall but couldn't forget. He pointed to the man in the center, his thin finger, joints trembling slightly, but steady, like someone tapping their heart when speaking a name long gone. "That one?" he said softly, his voice neither sad nor heavy. "He's the last one still alive in this picture. Only him." The words fell like a feather in the busy room, light, unintrusive, but leaving a clear mark on the ground. The clerk shrugged, a harmless gesture, but in this moment, it landed like a full stop. "Not like it's for sale anyway. You're not buying, right? So, sorry, we've got other customers." There was no malice in the voice, just the haste of those who'd never considered a rifle could carry memories, not just be merchandise, a tool born in a factory, but once held by men who stood on the edge of life and death, never speaking of it. The man didn't react. He didn't bow his head. He didn't ask for another minute. He just nodded, lightly, as he'd entered the shop, as if he'd known the outcome all along. No one saw. In that moment, his eyes linger a fraction longer on the photo, as if to etch each face deeper, as if fearing that once he left this place, no one else in the world would remember them but him. He took the photo, folding it carefully, slipped it into his inner jacket pocket, close to his heart, then turned away. His left leg tilted slightly as he stepped, carrying the memory of an old wound that never fully healed. Each step was a quiet jolt, not visible on his face, but clear in how he moved, steady, balancing, like a man who'd learned to walk through rubble and gunfire while holding his course. He didn't look back. The glass door opened, morning wind rushed in, carrying the smell of exhaust and roadside dust. Sunlight spilled over his shoulders, casting a thin, slow-moving shadow along the sidewalk. No one in the shop called him back. No apology, no final glance. Only the soft close of the glass door behind him. A small sound, like a rifle's bolt, ending a chapter in a book no one had time to read. And he, the last one alive in that photo, kept walking, silently, as men like him had always done, long before anyone in that room was born. Across the street, a woman was pumping gas. She stood still, gripping the nozzle as if she'd forgotten what she was doing. In her 60s, her face sun-weathered, her gray hair neatly bunned. On her faded jacket, an Air Force patch, its eagle emblem barely visible, frayed at the edges. No one noticed her, just as no one noticed him. But she saw everything. His limping steps entering the shop, his gaze on the rifle, the half-smirk of the young clerks behind the counter, and his downcast eyes as he turned away. Not one detail escaped her, not out of curiosity, but because she knew how the world looked through people like him, those carrying years no one cared to remember. She returned the nozzle to the pump, pulled a phone from her pocket, dialed. No hesitation. Her eyes still tracked his figure fading across the street. 3 words cracked from her dry lips. He's been disrespected. Then she hung up. At 11:43, 3 old military jeeps pulled up to the shop. No sirens, no screeching brakes, no music, just the steady, heavy hum of engines, as if carrying the breath of time long dormant. The doors opened. 12 men stepped out. Not one spoke. They didn't need to. The air itself closed around them, like an invisible gate slamming shut. Something in their stride made their shadows stretch longer, darker. Some wore civilian clothes, jeans, khaki jackets. Others donned faded fatigues, shoulder patches, chest insignias, small fabric markers meaningless to outsiders. No one smiled. No one looked back. They moved in a silent rhythm, as if every step had been rehearsed hundreds of times, not to stand out, but to avoid disturbing what lay ahead. They crossed the sidewalk, not fast, not slow. Each step pressed the air, making every surrounding sound feel distant. A few passers-by froze when they saw them, not because they recognized anyone, but because instinct warned something was unfolding they shouldn't interrupt. The gun shop loomed ahead, like a still photograph. No one inside knew they were coming. The door chime rang as the first man entered. A thin ting, fragile as thread, but sharp as a blade, slicing through the already cramped air. No one spoke. Only eyes began to lift from behind the counter. The youngest clerk, fresh off his 5th tick-tock of the morning, looked up. His first glance was casual, expecting a customer griping about a sale item. But the second glance, it slowed, then stopped. He scanned the room. 1, 2, 3, 12 men, all standing still. No one touched a weapon. No one reached out. No voice rose. But what they carried didn't need to be seen to be felt. It was in their eyes, in how they stood. Not threatening, not showy, but weighted. The weight of something that had happened, had been defended, and was never forgotten by the men now facing this young clerk. A heaviness rose in his chest. Not quite fear, not quite confusion, but the first time he didn't know what to say. And of course, they didn't need him to say anything. Dear audience, take a moment to relax, grab a glass of water, and keep listening to this story, with surprises still to come. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always exciting to see someone join us from all corners of the world. Comment 1 if you're loving this story, so we can keep bringing you more like it. The young clerk still wore his earbuds, eyes glued to his screen, fingers scrolling endlessly. Electronic music pulsed in his ears, its frantic beat completely detached from the reality around him. He didn't notice the door chime, didn't notice the air turning thick, as if a storm were brewing, until the shadow of 12 men enveloped the counter. It wasn't sudden, but when he realized, the entire counter was cloaked in shade. The first feeling wasn't fear, but cold. A chill spreading from his spine to both arms. He looked up. Before him were faces not unfamiliar. He'd seen them in history books, but never in real life. 12 men, standing still. Their eyes seemed to pierce through layers of time's dust, through him. No one spoke, no need to. One of them, the closest, placed something on the counter, slowly, precisely, as if the act were ceremonial. A photo. Old, worn edges, torn corners. The clerk looked down and flinched slightly. It was the same photo the old man had carried. 8 soldiers in fatigues, standing amid mud and dense trees, half smiling, dust coating their foreheads, arms over shoulders. And in the center, the man who'd left the shop that morning, younger, but unmistakable. The room seemed to freeze. The oldest man in the group stepped forward half a step. He didn't need to raise his voice, but it rang out as if the room were built to hear it. "The man you sent away," he said, each word clear as a tap on stone. "Led my unit out of the jungle in 1968. No radio, no backup, no light but his eyes." A silence fell, heavy as a blanket, draping every corner of the walls. "He carried me half a mile when I was unconscious, my back bleeding, my hip broken. But I'm alive because of him." The clerk swallowed hard, his throat suddenly parched. He glanced at the second man, who stepped up to the right. This one carried little, just a piece of metal, small, scorched, a hole punched through its center like a bullet's mark. He placed it on the photo. The metal touched the glass, making a faint sound like a clock's tick, but echoing louder than any words. "This dog tag fragment," the soldier said, "is mine. He took it from my neck after an ambush in the Middle East. Folded it, kept it through the night. I was dead on paper for a while, but not in life, because he didn't leave me." Then he looked straight into the clerk's eyes. Not angry, not threatening, just a quiet presence that made turning away impossible. "He didn't ask for anything," he said slowly, "just to touch a piece of memory we owe him." The words, "owe him," hung in the air, etched onto the young man's face. Something warm welled behind his nose. Not shame, awareness. He no longer faced customers, but a formation. Each man carrying a piece of the memory of a man just pushed out the door, and a shard of honor society had quietly denied. He opened his mouth to speak, but didn't know what to say. No apology felt timely enough, no explanation gentle enough. And the men before him didn't need his words. They hadn't come to hear him. They'd come so he wouldn't stand alone. His name began appearing on forums, not from a self-promoting post, Not from a profile picture or boastful status updates. Just a name, quietly emerging among hundreds of comments, as if it had always been there, waiting for the right moment to be called. Robert S. Halley. No Facebook, no selfies, no tagged friends or trendy short videos. But people started talking about him, like they'd talk about October's cold winds or the late afternoon church bells. Not loud, but lingering long. One person said, "He saved a child from a fire in 1984, not on duty, not in uniform, just passing by, seeing flames, hearing cries, and stepping in." No one took photos. No one asked his name, but the child's mother never forgot. Another said, "Every Sunday morning, for over a decade." He appeared at the Veterans Cemetery south of town. No one hired him. No one paid him. Just him, a wire brush, a rough cloth, and gravestones dusted by time. On rainy days, he still came. On snowy mornings, his footprints carved deep, straight rows in the white. No one ever heard him speak of war. No one knew if he had a wife or children. They only knew. He greeted them with his eyes and a slight nod, as if their mere presence was enough. No questions needed. Then that photo began to spread. First, a simple post in a small veterans group online. Gun shop, this morning. No hashtags, no explanation. 12 men, standing in a line, inside the gun shop, all facing the cashier's counter, silent. No one carried a weapon. No one raised a banner. No one spoke a word. But between them, in the space between their shoulders, in the soft noon light filtering through the glass door, was a force no words could match. The only caption below the photo, "Don't forget those who don't speak." That was all. No names, no analysis. But those who'd been soldiers, who'd walked battlefields, who'd sent friends off never to return, they understood instantly. They didn't need to ask, what happened? They just looked at the photo and knew. Someone had been pushed out, and 12 men had returned to step in for him. Halley's name appeared more often. No one knew who first typed it. But when a name is written with respect, it never fades. In a Marine group, someone posted, "He shared half his rations with me for 3 weeks straight at Hill 421. I never asked why. To this day, I don't know whose share he gave me." A paratrooper wrote, "If that's Halley, we're talking about a man who doesn't need a certificate to be remembered." They called him the silent legend. By 3 p.m., the local news ran a brief report, no background music, no effects. The anchor spoke slowly. "A silent visit, when brothers in arms stand up to speak for one." Nothing more was needed. The story told itself, and though Robert S. Halley had no status update of his own, his name was being spoken everywhere. Not because he asked for it, but because his silence was finally heard. No one saw Halley after that day. No one met him again at the usual coffee shop corner, where he'd order a black iced coffee, no sugar, and sit quietly, gazing at the street as if hearing a song only he could hear. No one saw him walking the sidewalk early Sunday mornings anymore, left leg tilting slightly, hands in the pockets of his faded old jacket, as if still keeping the cadence of a march no one commanded. He vanished, the way war survivors often do. No goodbyes, no footprints left behind. Then, a week later, in the early morning as the sky just began to glow, the shop received a package. No one delivered it. No return address. Just a small paper box, placed neatly at the front door, as if it had waited there all night, silently hoping to be found. On the lid, in a trembling but firm hand, a simple line, "To the gun shop, west of town." The shop manager opened it, His hand slowed as he saw inside an old cap, a ranger cap, faded, threads frayed around the brim, its bill softened by years. Lifting the cap, beneath was a piece of paper, folded neatly in thirds, lying still like a final whisper. He unfolded it, reading aloud no more than a sentence. I don't need to carry the rifle, just the memory. No name, no signature. But everyone knew whose it was. The cap was placed back on the counter, right beside the M14 he'd once asked about. The manager wiped the dust from the glass case, gently adjusting the rifle's position. Then he took the old photo, the one of 8 soldiers in the jungle years ago, and set it in a mahogany frame, standing it upright next to the cap. In front of it all, he affixed a small brass plaque, plain, unadorned, engraved with a single line. He walked alone, but never lonely. Soon after, others began to come. No schedule, no one prompted. Just one by one. A veteran who'd driven army trucks. A woman who'd served as a battlefield medic. Even young people who'd never seen combat but understood the weight of silence. They came, leaving something at the door. A silver-plated coin. A white flower. A unit patch. Even an old dog tag with a misspelled name. Each item a wordless thank you. One afternoon, as the sun sank slowly toward the horizon, a group of high school students visited the shop on a local history trip. At first, they darted around the displays, giggling at the sight of antique weapons. But then their teacher, a woman in her 40s, hair in a high bun, black-framed glasses, stopped before the photo. She said nothing for a few seconds, just stood still. Then she called the group over. A boy stepped up, his eyes leaving his phone for the first time all morning. The teacher pointed to the photo and the glass case, her voice blending into the surrounding quiet. This is a man who walked when the world turned its back, and 12 others returned to remind us. Some people never leave. The kids didn't fully understand, but they fell silent. And in that moment, that silence held more value than any history lesson ever printed on paper. Robert S. Halley left no medals, no will. But he left something time could never take, the invisible presence of dignity. No one needed to know how many shots he fired, how many lives he saved, or what he sacrificed. They only needed to know, when he was pushed out, 12 men stepped in, not because he asked, but because they owed him a debt no money could repay. They didn't let him stand alone, not when he'd done what was right his whole life, never asking to be seen. If this story stirred something in you, a quiet warmth, an awakening, or just a pause amid the rush, share it. Subscribe to the channel to catch more stories about people who don't shout, but always make us listen. Comment below. Let us know where you're watching this from, and what time it is. And if you know someone like Halley, someone who lived, who sacrificed, who stayed silent, write their name. Because sometimes, just saying their name is enough to ensure they're never forgotten.